Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Mike Reed of Midwest Whitetail to discuss his incredible 2023 hunting season and late season tactics that you can put into action right now. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and the Camo for Conservation Initiative. And here we are at the end of 2023. I believe this is going to be our last episode of the year. And I want to wrap it up here with another fun episode looking back on this past season with a terrific hunter. Our guest today, Mr. Mike Reed. You likely know Mike from Midwest Whitetail. He's been a prominent figure on the Midwest Whitetail show for years. And now, I believe, is one of the co-owners. He is doing all sorts of good work there, putting out daily blogs and being a part of, Chasing November and their main season shows. You can follow so much of what he's doing there, and he's doing it really, really well. Mike had a incredible 2023 season, killed his top 2 target bucks, has had his family out there hunting with him and helping them have success. So today on the show, we actually end up talking about hunting with kids and his experience with his family. We talk through each of his successful hunts this year where he did fill his tags there in Iowa, the lessons he learned, the tactics he used. We dive into a lot of how he approaches targeting one single buck, because that's something he's really found a way to be successful at over the years, consistently putting his tag on his top 1 or 2 deer on the properties that he hunts. We cover some of that. We talk through some of the things that translate from what he does now in Iowa to some of his previous types of hunting setups back in the past when he hunted in Louisiana or when he didn't own land. So that's interesting. And then finally, we wrap it all up by discussing some of the tactics that can help you and that have helped him in the past during the late season. So if you're listening right now and are trying to have some of that last minute luck around the holidays or early in 2024, Mike's got some ideas as well. So that's the game plan for today. Let's get right into it. Let's not beat around the bush, and let's get going with Mike Reed. All right, with me on the show is someone who I've wanted to have on for a long time and just hasn't happened yet for some reason. So I'm very glad to introduce Mr. Mike Reed. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I've been, following what you've been doing and all the guys at Midwest Whitetail for a long time now. And you've been on that list I have of guys that we just got to get on the show eventually. So I'm glad this worked out. And under good circumstances, too. You've had a heck of a year, huh?
Yeah, it's been one that I think we're going to have a tough time beating for a while. Between myself having a great season, but just the kids and the family, it's been one that'll be tough to top for sure.
What's that been like as the kids have gotten more and more into hunting? And has that forced you to reshift priorities at all, or how much time you're spending? How do you handle that?
Yeah, for sure. I think naturally it's what I want. My interest in hunting has just progressed over time. And now to sort of building that desire in my kids and teaching them. And so, my oldest daughter is 12, and she picked up a bow this year. Actually, last year, started practicing with the bow, and we were able to make some hunts with the bow this year. And she's become a really proficient hunter, a patient hunter. She's had great success. And I'm trying to build up that woodsmanship in her and some of the scouting and some of the stuff that my grandfather taught me on, pounding it out on Louisiana public ground. And, now Ryan and I actually were just talking a couple hours ago about what next year is going to look like as my, so my 12, 10, 8-year-old girls, my twins are going to be 6 in February. And I said, Bryn, my 8-year-old, killed 2 bucks this year. I just killed her second one a week ago. And Bella's killed 2. My 10-year-old is circling back saying, I think I want to go again. She shot one when she was 7. And now she's like, I want to be like my other 2 sisters. And the boys are chomping at the bit. I was like, there's no way I can be able to take 5. I have Ryan, my wife, trying to help me. It's a ton of fun, though. It just is so much fun. And I get way more, I think, enjoyment out of that than even, hunting for myself. I think it's just a lot of fun to see their excitement. It's so pure.
Oh, man. So great. It makes everything new again for you,
Yeah,
that's exactly what I found is we kind of we take so much for granted right? After doing this for so many years, and we get so deep into it and kind of obsessed with the deer we're after, or yada, yada, yada. And then you take out your kid and all of a sudden they see the squirrel next to the tree and are like, that's amazing,
It's
Dad.
amazing. Yeah.
It's so good.
It is.
You need that.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, it just rekindles a lot of things. And, I want my kids to enjoy the outdoors. And so to see them, like Bella this year, getting in a tree stand for the first time, being in the timber and being like, man, that squirrel is 3 feet away and got turkeys and pheasants and deer. And just every time she turns around wide eyed, being like, oh, it's just so enjoyable.
Yeah. So now that we're on this topic, I've got to pry you for some info that'll help me. So like I've told you before we started recording, I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. They're just about 4 and 6. And they both want to go all the time. And the 6-year-old, almost 6-year-old is gung ho and like is getting good as far as like being able to control himself out there, being able to stay quiet. He's into it all. The 4-year-old is manic, right? As most 3/4-year-olds would be.
Yep.
So one of the things I've struggled with, or just thought about a lot, I guess, is trying to find this balancing act when you take them out, whether it's hunting or a camping trip or whatever. Balancing this idea of keeping it fun, right? You want them to enjoy the thing, so they want to keep doing it. But then I also have found, or at least maybe this is just me, but I've thought that hunting and the outdoors and things like that are opportunities for growth in a kid too, right? Learning mental toughness, or learning how to persevere, or learning how to deal with a little bit of discomfort. How have you navigated that with your kids? You've been through it a bunch now. You're ahead of me. Is that something that you've ever thought about at all, or do you lean one way or the other? What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head as far as growth. I mean, not only are they learning actual useful information and how to harvest food from the land and be self-sustaining and all these types of things, but it's challenging, right? How many 6-year-olds have put a pack on and climbed up a big hill, and I try to use little moments like that to say, hey, there are a lot of things we have to work for. It's hard. It's okay if it hurts a little. It's okay to suffer a little and have a challenge that you overcome. And I actually use it a lot in everyday life, talking to them about, if they're whining about something or crying about, this, I got an owie or something. I'm like, hey, we talk about going elk hunting. We talk about going out west in the mountains and how tough you have to be to go and do that for a week in the mountains. And, sometimes we got to suck it up and like, it's okay to push through some pain. And, I think it's hard to get that in other places in life. The outdoors certainly offer some opportunity there. And I definitely try to, capitalize on those.
Yeah, that's the truth. So does anyone in the family still have tags for the late season?
Yes. Yeah, actually. So the second split of archery and late muzzleloader in Iowa just opened up today, actually. And Bella, so my wife got a landowner tag and filled her first shotgun tag. So she technically could get a late muzzy tag, but she's usually happy with one. Bella, I offered her, she got a Kansas buck and then a youth buck. And so she can get a late muzzy tag. And I had offered her, like, do you want second gun and go with the 350, or do you want to go late muzzy with the crossbow? And she was like, I want to go late muzzy, just because she gets 2 weeks off of school and she'll want to go every day. So,
that's so great.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, all right, you'll get. And then I asked my third daughter, Bryn, I said, do you also want to wait for late muzzy, or do you want to get the second shotgun? And she went ahead and got second shotgun, and 2 sets in, got a buck last Sunday. And so she's done. And so, yeah, my daughter, Anna Cat, she hasn't hunted in 3 years, as I mentioned. She has a late muzzy tag, and then Bella will have a late muzzy tag, and myself. And, so that's going to, from here until the end, I take every day off, every afternoon off, starting January 1st. I get busy at work the end of the year. And so we hunt the holidays. It's kind of a family affair. We'll all be out there on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and all that. So those days will be good. But then starting New Year's, that 10-day stretch will go every afternoon. Wow. So there's still plenty of hunting to be had for the Reed clan.
Yeah. With all these kids, I feel like you're like running an outfitter. Like you've got so many people to put here and figure this out. I mean, you've got a lot of balls in the air trying to figure out who goes where and when, and you've got an interesting hunting situation there.
in a way. And it's been something that it's a little challenging to balance. I said, there's no way we can all continue to shoot this many deer. I mean, I've bought land and invested in land and tried to diversify, get good pieces that have good carrying capacity and can carry a lot of deer. And a lot of them, I don't shoot anything the first 3 years I own them. I just try to get the age structure really up. And we're pretty nitpicky. Even the kids, from the time they were little, we talk about what we actually go after. And they always say, we want to shoot grandpa deer. And I'm like, exactly. So, if a buck comes out like, is that a grandpa deer? And I'm like, that one's not a grandpa deer. We'll go ahead and keep waiting. And it's nice because I have good age structure and I haven't, they don't have giant racks, but there's plenty of 5-year-old type plus deer between the properties. And it's been a luxury. It's been a blessing for sure to be able to say, okay, we can go and harvest. And a lot of them, I mean, the kids will shoot some 4-year-olds and things like that. I mean, obviously a first deer is different, kind of go shoot whatever, but I try to start fairly early thinking about conservation and the herd management.
Yeah.
And it's been a challenge though, to set up enough spots that you can say crossbow hunt out of. Cause when they're real little, they're not super interested in the gun. I almost ruined my oldest daughter with the gun, getting her on a muzzleloader when she was 6 and she killed one. But then she was 7, it kind of got her. And boy, I've really taken a step back saying, look, whenever you guys are ready, and that crossbow has been a blessing to be able to take them, doesn't make noise, doesn't kick. I just got to get them within 40, which obviously that's a challenge, especially late season.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's that age that you found? This podcast is going a whole different direction than I originally planned, but I'm so interested in this because my kids are right there. We don't have an age limit anymore in Michigan as far as your minimum age. They can start going as soon as they want, as long as they're with a parent or mentor. And so my 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old boy for 2 years, but like, I can do it, Dad. I can do it. I'm like, no, we're going to wait a while. But what I've struggled thinking through what that right age will be. And is there a difference between when he physically can pull the trigger accurately versus when he's like mentally ready? Have thought about that a lot. How have you gone about, that decision with your kids?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's different for every kid, and I even think probably between boys and girls, it's probably a little bit different. I feel like my boys are, they're doing that boy thing where they just want to shoot all the time. They love shooting the 22. They love that just, target acquisition, getting a good sight picture, doing all that kind of stuff. Bella being my first, I just cultivated it in her and I felt very comfortable when she was 6. Anna went when she was 7. And when we did it, I was like, oh, it's probably a little bit early. Bryn went when she was 6. I was like, it's definitely too early. I mean, she was just in the blind doing all this. And, late season in a blind with the heater, with some hot chocolate and snacks and like a puzzle and some books and like trying to make it very, very fun, but say, let's get up and count the deer. Let's talk about the deer. It's interesting. I think your situation, it matters. What you're going to put a kid into, they got to be comfortable. It's got to be fun. It can't be too long. And I've definitely started, like last year, I didn't take Bryn when she was 7. This year at 8, I mean, she's totally ready, in the zone, knows how to get focused. And, some of my kids are a little more ADD than the others. And so that's fluctuated with how I might approach, them individually. And it's hard to know the right answer because I've had buddies take their 5-year-olds and just knock it out of the park. But, with my kids, I've kind of tiptoed around that 6, 7 age mark and sort of feel better a little bit older. Like, come sit in the blind, come watch. But you need to sort of show me that you can do it before I just turn you loose, right? But
and what about the age when they've actually been like able to pull the trigger and do that well? Has that been like that 6, 7 mark?
Yeah,
or
6,
has
7.
That been...
Bella was 6, Anna was 7, and Bryn was 6 on the crossbow. That crossbow, it's a little tiny one. It's compact and it fits them. And of course, we do lots of practicing at the house until I feel like you can get a good group. We study deer pictures, where to aim. I make them take a pencil and put marks, and I'm very selective about when I would give them the green light. Both my first 2 did really well, no issues. My third daughter, she kind of was arguing with me in the blind, she was 6 years old and there's a deer at 40 and I'm like, just use the 40 dot. She's like, I want to use the 20 dot. And I'm like, you can shoot this doe right here, and then I'm like, there's deer walking and moving and she's all over the place. I was like, wait, okay, everybody just take a step back. Let's stop for a second. Wait for a nice, like, let's make sure we're shooting the right one. And
Yeah.
So I think it is different for each kid. Um, and the gun, I've wanted to wait until they just feel super comfortable shooting the gun. Take them some out turkey hunting where it's not so much chaos. But yeah, I think that 6-7 range has worked well for me. The boys are certainly beating on the door. They're 5, and they really want to go. And I'm like, I want them to wait one more year,
Hmm.
just because it's hard to take 5 kids.
I can imagine. Um,
We'll
for
have
the
to have
gun, you
Josh
mentioned,
help me out.
yeah, seriously, got to get the whole crew there just taking out the kids.
Yeah,
Um, you mentioned a 350 and you mentioned a muzzle loader. Has the 350 been the best option for the young kids, or what
for
have you
sure.
started them most
Yep.
with? Okay.
So I had a muzzle loader, and I got kind of loaded it down, 50 grains, and keep the shot close. And that's just because that's all I had at the time. When Bella, that was 6 years ago. Since then, Iowa changed the law where you can use a smooth wall cartridge rifle during youth and shotgun, and you can't do it during late muzzleloader or early muzzleloader, but youth and shotgun. And I got a little youth 350, and really at the recommendation of a bunch of my buddies, just saying, and the gun shop saying that's a great youth gun, and
Yeah.
they shoot it very well, very consistently, out to 100, great group, and they don't complain about the recoil. And so, to me, I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of other calibers, but at the recommendation of a lot of people, tried it and have really loved it.
Yeah. I've got one of those. You can use those in Southern Michigan during our rifle season. And I thought the same thing.
Yeah,
Perfect for someone young. I mean, no recoil, light, easy to use.
yeah,
Um, Strong choice.
very
So,
effective. Yeah, and I mean, heck,
yeah,
it puts them down too.
it does. It does the job. You
We've
don't
had
need
great
more.
success. Yeah,
Yeah, you really don't need more. So, what about your season? So you've had the kids out; they've had some success. I've seen for sure you've taken 2 of your
yeah.
target bucks. Have you taken anything else, or is that the
No,
that?
that's here in Iowa. I used to do urban. I stopped doing urban a few years ago. When I first moved up here, just my job was so labor intensive that I couldn't get out of town hardly. So I started doing urban. It was a nice way to manage the population, but and get an extra tag. But essentially in Iowa, you get an archery tag, you get a statewide gun, and then you get a landowner to choose either archery or gun. And so I usually get a landowner archery and a statewide archery. And yeah, I took down DK on October 30th. Buck that I kind of come into the season, he was going to be my primary target. And really, before we even got going with the rut, he comes strolling in, and in a spot that I've had a lot of good luck with on my river bottom farm, and a spot I call the pinch. It's just a great
Mhm.
natural little funnel area. And yeah, he just walks into 20 yards, and yeah. I hunt some deer for years, and can't even get them within 50. But that one
Yeah.
worked out pretty well.
So we got
And
to rewind that a little bit,
yeah,
Mike,
sure.
because you, like you mentioned, you've hunted some of these deer for years, and while some of them have taken you a while, I mean, you've any deer that makes it on your hit list is in big trouble. It seems like for a long time now. I mean, you've gotten your target bucks or one of the bucks on your list or several of the bucks on your list every year. So you've really seemed to have nailed down this process of like figuring out a specific buck. So that's something I love to do, and I guess I'm
Yeah,
just curious about what that process has evolved into for you now after you've done this for so long. You have a system that obviously is working now. Like what
yeah.
maybe with DK as an example, or if one of these other bucks is a better example, can you kind of walk me through how you go about kind of putting that entire plan in place to dial it in and kill that one deer?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, a lot of it goes back to history. I have been very fortunate and be successful over the last good bunch of years, at least the last 5 years. When I really started saying I'm going to just hunt this deer, just enjoying the chase. Right, I used to sort of have my list of these are all my shooters on the farm, any buck that's 5 or older, and I was pretty happy to take any of them. And then over time, I kind of said, well, let's make it a fun chase and go after one. And I am fortunate since I own the property, and I've owned the river bottom since 2017, and the home farm since 2018. Now to have years of history, probably what works the best for me is I get to sort of pick up on these deer when they're 3, and then 4, and I'm just not going to shoot them then, and I'm watching them and learning a lot about their movement patterns, where they like to be, what times a year. And I knew DK pretty well because we've got 4 years of history with him and where he likes to be. And so coming into the year, I just designed my plan around that. Where am I going to put food? Where I'm going to set up my spots? How am I try to get them early? And then you got your good natural rut spots that if you sit there enough and they're in the area, you should probably encounter them. And then I always fall back on late season. If I had a good amount of time to have success growing my crop and my food plots, the river bottom's a wetland, so there's a lot of rules. And I have a compatibility use agreement with the NRCS that allows me to put 5% of the property into food plot. And so there's no ag there, as far as just, oh yeah, I planted 100 acres, I combined 80 and I left 20 standing. I've got 5% and I mix it between green and grain, but the deer population is so high there, and I'm still working on that. It's hard to grow grain, so I do sorghum and I do beans and corn, and I got to fence it. And then it's been a struggle to grow it. But the years that we can get good food, late season ends up being, if you haven't got them yet, you probably are going to be able to get a shot at them late season. But I prefer archery hunting. I love the chase in October, November. And so really historical knowledge and then just learning the property. I added on to the River Bottom Farm in 2020, and that was an extra 340 acres in addition to the 220. So it was a big chunk. And I feel like just this year, I sort of know how deer like to use it, just natural movement patterns. And then what has changed over the last 2 years is the drought years, which sloughs have water and how that affects deer movement. And then this year, the mast crop was just insane. Yeah. And both the bucks I shot, I have all my spots I like. And I'm like, if I just rotate where I'm hunting in the wind, I'm going to encounter them at some point. Like this buck lives over here and kind of dips in the farm over here. This one's over here. And 560 acres, it's a good chunk of ground, but it's not like I encompass their home range completely, right? So all these deer are coming and going, and they're crossing roads and encountering other hunters and all that kind of stuff. But this year I modified a lot what I was doing just based on the mast crop and where the does were, and it worked really well.
So when you say you modified what you're doing based on those two things, how did you modify? Like, were you modifying your habitat plan or just how you hunted?
No, just how I hunted. Yeah. So the river bottom doesn't have a ton of oak trees, and there's a couple of just concentrations of them. And I noticed there was a good mast crop, but then I'd go sit there and be like, man, there are 20 does just sitting here for 2 hours all morning. Right. And so coming in and out, I was like, well, so then it was like, okay, I'm not going to go move and hunt. When I get that north wind, I'm not going to go to that spot I like with the north wind. That's just sort of a good spot. I'm just going to keep hunting around these oak trees, playing the wind just in this spot and kind of staying in those locations. And just because all the deer were coming there, and you just knew the bucks, they were going to be there that morning, right? The amount of encounters we were just having, it was hard to want to go somewhere else. I'm like, this is obvious. If I keep sitting here, it's gonna work. And even when we switched to my second buck, and who was all the way on the south piece of the property, and again, the farm I've just kind of been learning the last couple of years, and I just I'd hunted this one particular tree a few times in the past, but it was always okay. I just noticed that those red oaks were just dropping like crazy, and just all the deer kept going there. I said, well, I think if we keep sitting there, we're going to kill them. And 5 years of history with this deer, it's been kind of all over the place, all over both pieces of the river bottom. And I had 3 encounters with him in one day, and then ended up shooting him November 11th. And it was just like, well, it's hard to talk myself out of going. Ryan asked me, where do you want to go tonight? And I was like, we got to go back to that spot. Just because, and, you'd climb in the stand and there'd be deer. You could see them bedded. They'd get up, come feed in the acorns, go back in bed. And it was just interesting dynamic. I don't know that we'll see that again soon. In 6 years owning the place, I've never seen a mass crop like that. It changed the deer patterns for sure.
Yeah. So I know that mass situation was unique, but one of the things I've struggled with sometimes is this. I guess it's like a pressure, and it comes from what we've heard a lot and what many of us have seen in our own hunts, which is, oftentimes the first time you hunt a spot, it's the best, right? And then
Yeah.
your impact slowly chips away at the deer activity, right? And so there's always this temptation to be like, okay, I should move. Okay, I should go to the next spot. I should go to the next spot. Bounce
Yeah.
around, keep them on their toes. But then sometimes, like in a situation like you're talking about, the right move is actually to stick it out. Or I've had a deer, like I was hunting this year, that it seemed every time I would go to A, he'd be at B. So then I would go to B, and then he'd be at C. And then I go to C, and he's D. And I kept on like rotating around, and he'd always be random in which way he was going. And then I finally got to thinking, I just need to stay in a spot, and then he'll eventually cycle to me. How do you think through that and manage those two kind of competing thought processes when picking out where you want to hunt?
Yeah, yeah. I don't like to overhunt a spot. I mean, I usually say if I've got a buck that's using area and I feel like I've got a good chance, I do like to give it 3 sits. A lot of times I just play the law of averages, like he's going to come by. But for the sake of, like what you were mentioning, you stink it up and you disturb it too much. And some spots kind of lend themselves if they've got good entry and exit to repeat hunting without disturbing it too much. Other spots you're blowing out deer every time you go. And the pinch is one of those spots where I really feel like I can just hunt it over and over and over, particularly in the morning. I don't hunt it in the afternoons hardly ever. I can get in there in the morning. The deer are nowhere around. We get in early, and the thermals help me so much. Got deer on all sides of me. We never get picked off there. They all work past. I hunt till noon or whatever, get down, get out. And I've got a mowed path that basically goes almost directly to the stand. And we hunt it repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. And I say it like we hunted it 20 times. I mean, that doesn't happen. I naturally, with wind directions and going back to work and all these things, give it breaks.
Yeah.
But I try to be conscientious about overhunting a spot. 3 spots is kind of 3 times is my number. And then I've changed what I do for vacation. I used to take a week off, and hunt 9 days, and then that was it. So now what I do is I take 3 days off, 2 or 3 days off the last week of October, 2 or 3 days off, 2 or 3 days off. And so I break up my vacation days. I usually take 7 or 8 vacation days over a 3-week period, flank weekends. And, before the time change, I can hunt afternoons a lot of times. And so, earlier I'm not hunting mornings, and we're working into the end of October, and then just that naturally gives my farms breaks. And then obviously having more than one spot, I can rotate around. But it's a little different than it used to be. Now that you pick a buck, you're like, I'm hunting DK and he's on this piece of the farm. I mean, I'm basically
Yeah.
rotating around that one spot. So I try to be conscientious of it and hunt smart. I don't dive way back in there very much. I mean, a lot of it's got good access. It's on the edge.
Yeah. So can you break down that pinch a little bit more? I know you mentioned you've got the mode path in and out, but what else makes it so that you can hunt it uniquely like that? And it seems like, I mean, I've seen an aerial of it, so I can
okay.
see that it looks pretty good. But for the folks listening that maybe don't have
Sure.
that background, can you kind of walk us through A, how you can hunt it so much, B, what it looks like and why it's so effective?
Yeah, and I get this question a lot. Just like on our videos, they'll type, how is this working? There's no way it works, and it's hard to appreciate it, I think, just from like an aerial or a drone shot. But so to paint a picture, the entire farm is a wetland. It's flat. There is no undulation. There's a couple sloughs, but it's all wetland grass. It's tall natives and wetland grass and willow thickets, and it's got great ground level horizontal cover. And so I have a lot of mowed lanes all over the place, primarily for fire breaks. I mean, I want to rotate my burning, and I have a 15-foot mower that I keep everything mowed really, really short. But it also allows, based on certain wind directions, access, because I can just use an e-bike or walk in boots, and there's just no vegetation to rub up against. And so all my spots I can generally access fairly well because of the mowed paths. The river is on the west side of the property. We have this 100-acre peninsula that is just thick, gnarly wetland and it's all bedding. And so the deer work their way out of that peninsula up the river in the afternoons to the north to all the big ag fields that I don't own. They're just destination ag fields. And then in the morning, I get there early, and I don't come down the river edge. I come at it perpendicular. So I come in from the road, and I have a mowed path essentially that kind of comes at the river perpendicular. And so the pinch, there's the river, and then there's a slough, and it's a strip of timber, oak trees. And then when you get on the other side of the slough, it's all that wetland grass, which is really, it's a lot of bedding as well. But it's little pockets and deer bed out there, and they don't all come through the pinch, obviously. But all the deer that are going back into that peninsula, they naturally come through that pinch. And when the slough has water in it, it works really well because you can have deep water in there and then the river, and they really walk through there. Right now, they spread out a little bit. Some you can see them going through the grass and the natives, and some are in the slough and all that. But it's still that peninsula pulls them to the river's edge because they're going around that bend, and it's one of those spots where I've killed four. I've owned the place 6 years. I've killed 4 bucks there.
Wow.
Yeah. That's I've hunted it a lot. And,
it's a good spot.
It's kind of funny. Yeah. 17, 19, 21, 23. So my camera guy's like, all right, every other year we got to shoot a buck.
Wow.
It works. It's a good spot.
And so that's where DK met his end, right? In the pinch?
That's right. October 30th.
Okay.
And it was sort of funny because we were seeing pre-rut activity. We were filming some great 4-year-olds and some great 3-year-olds, chasing, grunting, awesome vocalizations. And I had an encounter, a couple encounters with DK there. Last year I had one encounter like November 3rd with him. He didn't come all the way through, but I knew that he would come through there at some point. And I wasn't really thinking then, though. I thought maybe on a doe later in November. But that morning he just was eating acorns. There was does and some little bucks, and he's just kind of feeding and walking around. They're just socializing there, eating. And where the stand is, it's right in a little cluster of oaks where you can see the deer walking. They hesitate there to munch for a little bit. So it worked out well.
So walk me through what your kind of hunt strategy looked like, from the beginning of the season to that point. Because if I remember right, you took a couple stabs at him early, and he had daylighted in like a little plot somewhere, and you kind of were kind of the wrong spot, wrong time a couple times. And then that transitioned a few more hunts into that late October time period when you started hunting the pinch. But can you walk me through a few of those decisions along the way?
Yeah, that's right. So early October, mid-October, I tend to focus on afternoon hunts over whatever food source I think they're hitting. And he was living on the north side of the farm or off the farm and kind of venturing through the north piece of the farm occasionally. And I had 2 plots, little tiny clover plot, just little bow plot, 40 yards by 40 yards. And then a little acre and a half turnip plot. And when the deer come through the pinch and out of the peninsula, they often work through my turnip plot off to the north to all the ag, and just way more deer traffic there. And the little clover plot, it's just not in a high traffic area. So you can sit there and see a doe or two, and it is what it is. And so I tend to gravitate towards the other plot because I feel like he's more likely to show up there. And I had him the beginning of September, multiple afternoons in a row, eating turnips. And I put a bunch of radishes in there in front of the stand, and it just made a nice plot. And he was there a lot in early September. And I said, okay, the food patterns are going to change and this, that, and the other. But I still thought statistically that one's going to be better. And so I actually had a setup for a south wind, set up for a north wind. And I would go sit that blind, and there was a time or two that right at last light with 5 minutes to go, he'd pop up on that clover plot. And basically what he was doing, he was coming my way, but where he was bedding off the property, he would swing, he'd come through all this standing corn and then swing through that clover plot, get his picture taken, and then he'd keep working his way eventually after dark onto the turnips. And I thought, man, and I was always saying, well, if he's betted on me today, he's going to hit the turnips first. But if he's not betted on me, he'd probably be over there. It took a lot for me to go hunt the clover, and I ended up hunting it twice. And it was pins and needles because I'm just like, man, if he's betted in this corn right here, he's going to be on us. And the first time we hunted it, we actually stayed in the stand for 30, 40 minutes after dark, and we got a picture of him. I mean, he walked probably 60 yards from us and was working a scrape in the dark. We couldn't see him, but ended
That's
up getting
stressful.
Yeah, because I was like, well, let's let him, if he is coming in, let him come in and get past us.
God, that's the worst.
So early, I never felt like I have other deer. In fact, like last year, the buck I shot October 6th. I mean, he just was in the property, and I felt like, man, I could kill this deer early. I never really felt that way with DK just because he wasn't really on the property. And yet, had the cards fell the right way, I mean, it could have happened. I was still focusing on these October cold fronts and kind of playing my moves, but those two food plots aren't terribly invasive. And I just kept hedging on the turnips. And the one night he daylight while I was there, it just happened to be on the other one.
Man, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
And then you go through the month waiting on fronts and whatnot. You get to the end of October. You said that was the 30th, so that would have been a few days into that awesome cold front that we all got in the Midwest.
Yes.
Was that part of the rationale for starting to hunt those more? I know, I mean, it's kind of that time of year too, but you pushed into one of your best spots on a morning hunt. Was it the combination of it's the end of October and cold front?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, how could you draw up a better picture, And I had, it was actually the last day of my 5-day stretch of vacation. Maybe I had a 6-day stretch. I took off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then I had Monday. And I just love the pre-rut. I love the end of October. I love those older bucks looking for that first doe and just being callable and kind of doing that stuff. It's just one of the most enjoyable times to hunt. And so I started hunting mornings. I mean, if I look back over the last 15 years of hunting Iowa, I've had some really great pre-rut morning hunts starting October 20, somewhere around there. So I'll start hunting more mornings. I have to negotiate all this, right? So or balance out how much I hunt. And so early I'm doing a lot of afternoon, and then sometime around October 20th, I start focusing more on mornings. And like you said, the cold front, but I'd actually hunted the pinch maybe 3 or 4 times before that day. And we had gotten his DK's picture before I killed him. We got him way south into the farm. In fact, a spot where I'd really never gotten him. And I was like, man, this is so weird. Because what I was thinking was going to happen wasn't really happening. And we took 6 bucks off the River Bottom farm last year, which was kind of what I was like, man, I really cleaned out. I mean, 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And my daughter shot 2, I shot 2, Rye shot 1, and his wife shot 1. And it's $6. They were all 6 or older except one of them, if I remember right. No, 2 or 5.
Wow.
And we hadn't taken a lot of bucks the previous years. We were hunting Merino and Dax so much, and just got a lot of age on some of these deer. And some of these deer are 110 inches, but they were bully bucks, like we like to call them. And we'd taken them out of there. And I do think that was probably a factor in inviting DK being able to roam in there a little more. Was he didn't have as much competition. But, Mike Rye, we're talking it over about where to go because we got his picture, I think, that night to the south. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to hunt over there, though. I'm still going in the pinch because, whether he's coming out of me or coming back in after a night of tromping around, I mean, that's still the spot to focus on. And, just trying to get that area where you can get him in bow range. It's one thing to go sit somewhere and see a deer off in the willows, but get him in bow range. So the end of October, the food, the acorns there, the cold front, I mean, it all lined up well.
Yeah, couldn't write up much better than that.
Yeah.
So the void you created, it's very interesting. I mean, this scale, like the way you're able to do that is way off from what I could ever do. Like you have a lot of land there, and your age structure is incredible, and you can take 5-6 bucks over 5. That's amazing.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's crazy. But I think even like random schmuck like me could probably still learn something from this, or take something from this, and that, I've started thinking about trying to create a void myself. Now I'm working with like 100, 120, 80, like stuff like that. But I've had situations where there'll be like that really nice 3-year-old, and then there's a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they might be like the standard, just like, hey, he's going to be 120-inch 8, and he's 123-inch 8, and he's on 127-inch 8. And I've always been so paranoid to go and hunt some of these spots too often, in fear of educating these deer and pushing them off onto the neighbors and stuff, that I've sometimes avoided targeting a deer like that at all, because I don't want to go muck it up for that really nice 3-year-old that I'm hoping to hunt in a year or two.
Sure.
So how do you balance? Do you ever worry about that? Have you thought about that? Like, you got to kill the bully buck, or you want to try to open up a space for these younger, higher potential deer, but at the same time, you don't want to blow all the bucks off your farm and then have him get shot by the neighbors, or you educate that 3-year-old and then the next year he's on to you already. Anything like that ever happen?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about that over the years. And I mean, I've not owned land for a super long time. I mean, I've owned land now for 8 years. And so I've definitely changed the way I think about things. I've had some lease ground before that, but before that it was public and just grinding it out. And I had some friends that would let me hunt some back in Louisiana. And, but what I've come to the conclusion is, if I really make my property as good as possible, so food, water, cover, very inviting, and hunt it smart, those deer are going to want to be in there. And so, like, I don't worry too much about running off the 3-year-old because of my human pressure. I worry much more about the bully buck doing it. I mean, I've just seen it over and over where you get this, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old buck that I'm like, well, I don't want to burn my tag on that. Even at one point, I get one bow tag and before I own land, and I wanted to just hunt the best buck. Well, then you sort of think, well, it's great if there are multiple deer, but every farm's a little bit different. And how much cover do you have? What's your carrying capacity? I mean, you got a couple 5-year-olds. It's not like there's so much cover in the river bottom area. The deer density is ridiculous. I've never seen anything like it on anything that I've personally owned or hunted. And just year after year, there's just so many deer. So it's really a luxury. But like what I teach my kids, we still have to manage the herd. Once they get to 5, and you could argue, I think, in a luxurious situation that 6 would be better, as far as seeing the most potential out of antlers. But whatever they have on their head, they're probably not going to get a whole lot bigger, and you might as well hunt them and harvest them. They've reached full maturity. This is a grandpa deer. Let's do it, and so trying to just focus on taking out the mature ones and then hopefully keeping those young ones there to grow up and have future deer to harvest. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Man, I hope that 4-year-old that you call Moss, I hope he sticks around, because that deer is cool. I love that kind of deer. Heavy, tall brows, like the drop, the tall. Drop. I mean,
I know. Even last year. So I don't know him from the year before last, and you think he would be very recognizable. But last year I had one picture of him in velvet, and I was like immediately like, "Whoa, what deer is that?" You just see these big, tall brows, and then we got to get more pictures of him and get a good age guess. I was like, he's got to be 3, and he's a stocky 3-year-old, and this year I actually saw him again in velvet, and I mean, I just love those brows, and I don't have. I've never killed a deer with like a big drop tine. I've killed some little ones, and he grew a big base kicker, and it just takes everything I have to say. I want to see what he does next year.
Yeah,
when he comes at 10 yards like 3 times. But obviously, I try to commit. DK, okay, it's DK or nothing, and play the game. But good news, I did get a picture of Moss like yesterday night. I was like, he made it through gun season. So
that's great.
I feel like statistically he should hopefully be there next year.
Man, yeah, he is
the primary one.
He is super cool. I hope he's there for you.
Yeah.
So speaking of this kind of topic then, of like getting these deer to some age on them, the other deer you killed, I heard you talk about, I think it was on one of your guys' podcasts. You were talking about how Fitz, the other buck you shot,
Yeah.
looked like a 4-year-old forever. Like every year, you're like, he's a 4-year-old 10. And then next year, he's a 4-year-old 10.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about a deer like that and how a deer like that can kind of slip through the cracks for years.
Yeah.
And then finally this year, it all came together.
Yeah. It's such a strange thing. We put a lot of weight on body size and, skeletal structure and how you might age a deer and all this kind of stuff. And, I've seen too many times that example of a deer that just never is a big body deer. And so much of it goes back to just history, to really feel like, okay, I'm confident in where they're at. And I think for me, a lot of it falls back to he was a 3-year-old right when we really started. I started kind of picking deer to hunt. And it's at the same time as my chaos in my life between kids and work and Midwest Whitetail and everything else is on ramping up. And I said this on our podcast talking about I used to I didn't have kids and, it's all the trail cameras and all the time and just going through stuff. And I just knew everything about everything. And I never would have looked over at any deer. I just knew who they were. And I could tell you from 100 yards off,
Yeah.
oh, that's so-and-so. And so anyway, focusing on a certain target. And when I'm flipping through trail camera, or getting cell cam pics over the last few years, as I've transitioned to that, I'm usually blowing by stuff that's not the buck I'm after, and I just want the information I need to strategize. And so a little bit of that played into it. But a couple years ago, Fitz, we were seeing him late season, and every time he'd pop out of the timber, I'd say, "Man, that's a good deer. What deer is that?" And it's that big 4-year-old 10. And then last year, he just didn't change at all. In fact, I think he got a few inches smaller. And so then I started questioning myself, was he 3 last year and he's 4 this year? Or how old is that deer? And so I started going through trail camera pictures and I was like, oh man, he's been 4 a long time. So,
One of those like Benjamin Button deer.
Exactly. And so once I kind of got last year, I was focused on what I was doing with Kelsey and, but I told Ryan last year, I said, we need to hunt that deer next year. He's going to be 7. And, he grew his best rack. I mean, he went from a straight up 10 for 4 years in a row to a 6x7 with kickers. I mean, I think he had 17 scoreable points, which is
wow,
just nuts. He wasn't a lot of mass, not a big frame, but, lots of points. And certainly age is the most important thing. Just 7.5-year-old buck. I mean, who wouldn't shoot that? So
hard to argue that.
Yeah.
So how did that? Yeah. So how did that all come together? You killed DK at the end of October, and now you've got like a little work break. You got to go work for a while, and then you've got one of your little rutcations again. Yeah. So how did you kind of attack him now that you had to shift gears?
Yeah, because we were shifting into, primary breeding. So it's a pretty difficult time to hunt one particular deer, right? They're locked down for 2 or 3 days, and you might catch them. And we actually joked a little bit when I was hunting DK because DK is not on the farm. I'm like, he doesn't really live here. We're gonna have to kill him in November. But he was the one I wanted. But all the while, I'm getting pictures of Fitz in daylight over and over and over and over on the south end of the farm. And I was telling Ryan, I was like, man, mid-October, I think we could have killed him, gone in there and killed him. He just was he was on such a pattern. And I was like, it's not going to be that way now. And so anyway, kill DK, go to work for 3 or 4 days, and I come back to start over. And our first day back, I said, I still think, because it was November 3rd, maybe, November 3rd. I still think he's bedding in this one particular spot. I still think he's going in there in the morning and bedding down for a while, kind of mid-morning, 9:00 after he does his rounds. And I'd had a few pictures of him doing this thing over the previous 2 weeks. And so I thought that's our best chance, hopefully before he really leaves or goes and does whatever bucks do in the rut. And we sneak in there, and I was right. We're in the tree goofing off because we're not overly confident what we're doing. And all of a sudden I hear running and I turn around and he's coming up right behind us, and he got out of there. Both of us were pretty disappointed in ourselves because we had let our guard down, and that would have been an opportunity to just, I mean, bang bang. But
Yeah.
yeah, so he caught us, and I actually shifted to the other side of the farm, probably 800 yards away, the direction he ran off in that morning. I thought, he's going to probably go bed up somewhere over there. And then I had a food plot over there. And we saw him twice that afternoon. Once kind of harassing does out in the timber about 100 yards away. And then at dark, he came through the food plot. And I hunt that particular spot on a west, and I have a different where I killed them on a south. And so I said, you know what? In the mornings, we can go hunt our rut spots, but in the afternoons, we have these two food sources. I've got the acorns right here, and I've got that turnip plot that we almost killed them in. And just based on where the wind was, I was going to bounce back and forth between those two spots in the afternoon. And we actually never saw him again until the day that I shot him. So we had 3 encounters in one day. And then actually, he wasn't on camera for 3 or 4 days. And what I think was happening was, he was locking down with a doe. In fact, I went through that little 4 or 5 day cycle of hunting, went back to work for 2 or 3 days. We had some good weather come through, and I got a picture of him in the morning with a doe. And then I got a picture of him that afternoon going back out with the doe. And I was like, okay, he's just in this little area with the doe. And it's something that I actually seen the year before with him, right in that spot. And so it's where he liked to be in the rut. And so I just kind of said, I'm gonna hone in on this area. When he was 3 or 4 years old, he was farther to the north, but the previous couple of years he had moved down to his pocket of does, and I was really making decisions based on that, and hunting the does, where the doe is going to be, and those acorns. And that doe drug him under the tree, 3 yards. Just
Can't beat
nuts.
that.
Yeah.
So you killed these 2 bucks this year. Last year you killed Kelsey, and I think another big giant buck. And then the year before that you killed the legends, Dak and Moreno.
Yeah.
And you can go on and on. You've had this amazing run, but you mentioned a while back, you've only owned land for 8 years, something like that. And you've been in Iowa for 15 or something like that. Before that, you were in Louisiana, right?
Yep.
Hunting some public and hunting other people's stuff. So something a lot of folks, like to gripe about when it comes to like the hunting media today is they say, well, we're just seeing these guys kill these big giant bucks on a bunch of land they own, right? But I always like to kind of look at the situation and then separate the situation from like the strategies that have got them there. And I always think that even though I have better situations now that I hunt in than I had 15 years ago, man, I've learned so much that I could go back to those places and be way, way, way more successful than I was back then. So This is a long-winded way of getting to what would be like the top 1 or 2 things that you've learned in these recent years that you would take back with you if you had to go back to Louisiana, or if you had to go back to hunting public or by permission stuff. What do you think have been like those most important things now that would translate to a less ideal scenario?
Yeah, I think, probably the most useful thing that I've honed in on is scouting aerial maps. Looking at a piece of property, because the way I hunt is I want to figure out where the deer bed and where they feed. That dictates everything. Where they bed, where they feed, primarily. And then I have a few stands that are in bedding areas, and I love getting into thick stuff at the right time of year and having a lot of fun. That's how I grew up hunting public, because all the deer get pressured and go into that. But in the Midwest, it's a little bit different. It's different than the swamps of Louisiana, where it's just thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, and similar to what you probably hunt in Michigan, right? It's like big wood stuff, and and especially if it's heavily pressured, you're getting back into certain areas, and that's a lot harder to look at, I would say, aerials and pick out, okay, bedding, feeding, and I had some experience doing that. But it was private ground still in Louisiana, where there were food plots and there were things where you say, okay, and there were cuts where they were doing rotational logging operations, and
Okay.
you knew where the deer were going to primarily be bedded. And so you could sort of say, okay. And that's really back in the early 2000s when I started sort of honing that idea of, I'm not just hunting a trail, I'm not just hunting a scrape line. In a way I am, but I'm still trying to figure out, okay, where are these deer really bedding, and then where are they headed out to? And is that acorns right now? Is that ag? Is that something I planted? And I think it is definitely easier in the Midwest, but any property I get, and I talk to a lot of people, friends that have property, like, how would you approach this? And I mean, you pan that camera out, and where's the cover? And then topographically, what draws? Because deer, man, you go out hunting out in Kansas, and it's a ton of grass, and it's little ditches, and or you look at what Caleb just did recently on the show, like, it's just tree lines and waterways, and deer, they're resilient creatures and they find areas, but trying to figure out where you're at, where they like to hang out, and where they're going to feed and get in between, and that's probably the most useful thing.
Yeah. So then in the scenario that you are in, where you do have your own land and you can make changes and you have made changes and things, what do you think's the most important change that you have made as far as, being able to manipulate the habitat, set things up how you want? You've built something in a couple spots now that works really, really well.
Yeah.
If you had to put your finger on that one or two things that made the largest difference, what do you think that would be?
Probably food, honestly. So the home farm was a cattle pasture for 75 years, never farmed, and heavily, heavily hunted. Every year, the farmer that I bought it from let everybody drive through it and push all the deer out. And I mean, there was nothing for age on that farm when I bought it. And it was hay. Half the farm wasn't accessible because you couldn't get across the creek. The cows had access to it, but I bought that farm. I put in 4 creek crossings for different access. I did sod busts where I could start planting because I'm investing a lot of money into land. So, okay, let me start farming where I can, because maybe CRP or whatever I need to do to generate income to help cover costs and things like that. And I didn't need to make the bedding better on that property. It was already very centralized. Cattle pastures that are allowed to grow up, tend to be gnarly things. I mean, lots of locust and hedge and multiflora rows. So the bedding was pretty thick. And so I just optimized feed there, basically strategically putting food where I can hunt it. And then the river bottom is similar. The whole place is cover. It's interesting. Now, over time, finding out, okay, they really like that peninsula, then trying to work with the NRCS and the forester about, and the whole thing is not wetland. There's about 60 acres that's not a wetland that I can do what I want on, but where can we do TSI work to thicken up some areas and really hold them there, and then release some of those valuable trees, those mash trees, those white oaks that are in there, those swamp oaks, and that kind of thing. But it still goes back to food, because for years before I owned it, there wasn't food on it. And the year that we flooded, and another year where we just didn't have success, I didn't have the right equipment, and I was trying to figure out how can I grow food, and I hadn't bought electric fence yet. It's amazing. The deer are gone. I mean, once the rut's over, they go find food. And so I've made that a priority there. And here in the Midwest, in these situations, particularly as you get late, food is just king. It's a must, but it helps a lot throughout the entire season, right? I mean, early season, it matters. If you're holding does on your property, the rut's going to be better. You're going to hold more bucks. I mean, all these types of things. So just really putting a lot of time, energy, and effort into diversifying food plots and being successful with them, and what it was going to take there.
Yes. So that raises a question. When you say diversify your food plots, do you prefer to have different food sources in different places to get that diversity, or do you ever mix in single plots? I've heard you mention like clover plot, brassica plot, but But how do you usually do that to get that right ratio and
Yeah.
draw where you want it when you want it?
I generally have green plots and grain plots. Like the home farm, I actually commercially farm it. So I do my corn bean rotation and I combine everything except like 6 acres that I leave for food for late. And then I put in green plots. Now, my green plots, I tend to do a mixture. And I'm still playing around with it. I mean, I had alfalfa there for a long time that we hayed, and it just was so tore up. The guy that was haying it for me is like, we need to just farm it a few years. It was so eroded, and it just was a tough place to hay. So that alfalfa, I want to get back to it because it's so valuable early. It's so fun in velvet season, and it's a great spot to early bow hunt. And I've changed kind of how the home farm hunts by putting that into a crop rotation. But my green plots, like where Bella, my daughter, shot Big Mac in September, this 8.5-year-old deer, 5 years of history. I do brassicas. I usually have clover mixed in, and I love radishes for early. And so I'm going to do a brassica mix. Got some turnips and rape and sugar beets and everything in there with a clover base. So I'll either, depending on how old the plot is and how weedy it is, sometimes I kill it, turn it under, put the clover and everything at one time. But what's even better is, if I have a healthy clover plot, or like, let's say I do that to a green plot and I put clover in with the brassicas, it's mostly going to be brassicas that year. But in the spring, it's going to come up thick, lush clover. I'll mow it a couple of times, have a nice clover plot for turkey season and through the summer. But then when it comes time for the end of July, I'll go in there and either till under strips to put brassicas or drill brassicas in there and have a nice mixture. And then broadcast radishes. Like what I did this year, in front of each stand, I just went in a 30-yard circle and just put some extra radishes just onto the ground on top. And it was interesting to watch the deer kind of gravitate there and concentrate there. And I just like having a mixture in the green plots because I don't have tons and tons and tons of green plots. I have a couple that I like, and each one of those different things is more palatable at different times. And it's fun to watch what the deer like to eat, but I think they all kind of might feel like something different each day too.
Yeah.
They're in there and they got a smorgasbord, so it works out well.
Yeah, it seems like that diverse approach seems to have a lot of benefits to it, like you described there.
Yeah,
Now
and sometimes
you
like
get,
on a drought year, right? Like
yeah,
I mean, like not every you do a monoculture, you're gonna potentially hose yourself. So
yeah, you're
having some shade
putting,
tolerant, drought tolerant, and then hopefully end up with something to hunt over. And I mean, I've done this on where before I had any equipment. Like we always call it the poor man's spot. Go spray it and
mhm.
seed it, and you get a little bit of rain, and you can really make a spot a lot more effective by doing that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the home farm and how you've got this grain rotation. But I wanted to talk to you about the home farm to kind of wrap us up here a little bit because there was a late season stretch a few years back that I watched recently. I guess it would have been sometime this past winter. I remember watching these episodes with my son, and he got a kick out of it because two of your daughters, I think if I remember right, two of your daughters and your wife killed bucks in like back to back to back sits right around Christmas. And I think from the same blind or like very close to the same place, like over and over and over.
Yeah,
And that like blew me away.
yeah,
So I had to ask, as we move into this late season time period that we're actually in right now, when we're talking, there's people out there trying to get that late season last second magic. How, tell me about this like dream scenario, amazing situation you had somehow that was able to like handle that. Like, what did you have there that was drawing deer like that in the late season? What were the conditions that got these deer up on their feet over and over again? And how did you manage to do that without educating these deer the fact that, like, hey, we're getting hunted here,
yeah.
after you had a shot and a recovery, a shot and a recovery? How did that all work?
I know it's pretty crazy how it worked out, and the spot just lends itself to it so much. But it's in the back of the property. It's a 16-acre ag field, and it's a big bottom, goes up the hill, and it kind of tucks in back to the main bedding area. And it's this little finger of crop that goes back in there. And so what I did when I bought the farm, I just started looking at it and how it's set up. I was like, this is right up against the bedding. It's big, thick draws that go down into the timber, super gnarly, old cattle farm, as I mentioned, tons of multiflora rows. The deer cannot see out into the field from the timber. It's just so thick. And so when I bought the property and just kind of looked at where I could put green, I made 4 little green plots, north, south, east, west sides of this thicket. And so this back field, this little finger that goes back there, at the very tip of it, I have a little green plot, turnips and whatnot, which can be pretty effective late season as well. But then when we're drilling all of our crops, we go back in there and make a loop and turn around and come back out. And what I have done is I'll take plot screen, and the co-op works with me on this. It's kind of nice, but once my beans are coming up, I actually go and I'll till under a 6-foot wide strip or a 10-foot wide strip and hand broadcast a plot screen, some Egyptian weed and sorghum and whatnot, and pack it in, fertilize and flag it so that when they come back to spray my beans, they skip over that. And where it works out great for a northwest wind, and I can come all the way around to the back of the farm. We walk up this big hill and we're in the blind, and I've got plot screen. And so you got great entry and exit for late season. And then it's just right butts up against the bedding area. And it was Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. And then we skipped one day because the wind had switched out of the south, and then went back to that same exact blind when the wind switched back. So 3 sits, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, 3 kills. And it was a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and my 4-year-old. My 7-year-old daughter, it was her first deer. And we're certainly being less picky. And my wife was with us, and so it was really cool. There were 4 of us in the blind, and I think the farm is interesting because it's in the center of a pretty big section, and it gets hunted pretty heavily all around. So through gun season, deer move in there every year. Deer move in there. In fact, side note, the buck my daughter Bryn shot last weekend, I don't know the deer. And it's a big mature deer. And I got one picture of him the night before, and I texted my Rye and I said, man, look at this buck. And we went in there the next day and he was still in there and she killed him. And I don't know the deer, Big 10. It's like, and he actually had a bullet hole through his neck. And so, they just get a lot of pressure. Jeez. And in fact, that night there were 3 or 4 other shots, right? There's just a lot of activity. So my farm, in the grand scheme of things, is not very pressured. And I'm very careful about how we go about hunting it. And there's great cover on it and food. So that particular year, we sneak in there. We're using a crossbow. So that's also, you're not shooting up the place with a gun. And both my daughter at the time, would have been 9 or 10, Bella, and my wife, 30-yard shot, heart shot, deer runs 40 yards into the timber, and both of them died in the same exact spot. I mean, they shot them in the same spot. They died within 3 feet of each other. And so quick recoveries. I think if we were tromping let's say they hit them back and we were tromping all around the timber, maybe that wouldn't have worked out. Yeah. But being able to slip in there after dark, because they shoot them right before dark, get the deer out, get out of there, I mean, and I think the other unique thing is that we were seeing like a different mature buck each day, right? So, and I noticed that now, if I go just rotate around my farm, because the way I have all the food set up around that central area, there might be a buck that likes to go to one, but it's not at all surprising. They'll come out to the east one night, they'll go out to the south one night. So you kind of get a rotation where that buck that we were shooting the next day wasn't there the night before. So he wasn't part of that exposure to all the deer clearing the field or whatever. So it's sort of a perfect storm, but again, it goes down to, I think, low pressure, good deer numbers. At that point, I hadn't shot a lot of deer on that property, so we were getting some pretty good age amongst the bucks, and you couldn't draw that up any better. I mean, what a memory, right? I have the best photo ever of my wife and 2 older daughters, all with bucks, all with a crossbow. I mean, it's just a crazy story.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So what are some of the other kind of foundational late season things that you're thinking about if you were still trying to get one killed right now, or as you are probably trying to help your kids, in these coming days and weeks? What are some of the other things you're thinking about to help choose where to hunt or when to hunt?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It revolves around food, right? If you don't have food, you're not going to have deer. And they're definitely skittish this times of year. This time of year, it doesn't take much to clear a field, but we started. They're driven by their stomach, and I shot a great buck a few years ago. I have a property, one of the first properties I ever bought. I never sold it, and it's 2.5 hours away. And I rarely go there. We farm it. It butts up against a lot of cover, and it was January 1st. We had a huge storm coming in, and I was like, we got to go sit that place. And 180-inch deer comes out, and you're like, well,
Wow.
there you go. That's the recipe in Iowa for success. And
Yeah.
I think Iowa's unique in that we're far enough north where we're post rut. Rut's in November. We're post rut, and then we can have this harsh weather, and it just drives in the food. Of course, I don't hunt mornings then, just that sort of concept of the deer are feeding, and they're not bedding very far off the food. And so
Yeah.
if you go in there in the morning and blow them out of there, they're not going to come back out in the afternoon. And so not only are we transitioning from, hey, we were worn out, we just hunted however many days, and we need to get back to, other priorities. So it's kind of nice to, over the Christmas holidays, a lot of family time in the morning, and then we go do a 3-hour hunt in the afternoon. It works out well, but I also think strategically, you just have more success that way. I think some farms set up well to hunt bedding in the morning, the way their access is. I have friends that can do that late season. They can get in the back of a bedding safely and catch deer coming back from the crops. But none of my places really set up like that. So I focus on food and afternoons and cold weather.
You mentioned the plot screen that you had
Yeah.
on that home farm setup, which sounded perfect for getting out of there. Do you have any other exit strategies? Because that's always one of the toughest things I encounter is like, you can hunt good food in the evening. How do you
Yeah.
get out of there without spooking 1,000 deer if you're hunting close to the food?
I know it's tough.
What have you done?
It's tough. You know, I don't have this luxury anymore. At one point, I had enough people that didn't have anything to do that someone could come clear the field with a vehicle.
Yeah.
Now, nobody's coming to do that. So my wife would laugh at me. Maybe when my kids get a little bit older and start driving, I'd be like, "Hey,
Yeah, you're getting close.
We don't live on the farm, and so that's even the home farm's 30 minutes from the house. But that's a good strategy if someone lives on the farm.
Yeah.
Some of my food plots, like at the river bottom, a lot of deer, even though it's a 3-acre food plot, they come out of the peninsula. They'll feed there for an hour, but then they work off. I mean, every time, right? And so if you could somehow set it up where it's not truly the destination, that's ideal. Because you can just keep going back. They're not there when you get out. And then the other strategy that I've used where legal is like electronic calls, like a coyote call. You put your coyote call under the blind or in the bushes 30 yards away and have the remote. That's not legal everywhere, but you can turn on a coyote yapping and then all the deer run off and you just get out, sneak out, and get out of there. And,
That's good. Yeah.
That's pretty effective. If it's legal where you hunt, but I try to wait till it's super dark. We don't use lights. And I'm hoping that when I get out of there, one doe clears the field, right? And it's like they don't really know what's going on because I definitely have had to get out and clear deer off the food plot. Another strategy that I don't use a ton, I used to use it more like shoot a doe or something, but then you got to go recover the doe, and so I've never technically liked that one.
Become a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure what your forecast looks like, but usually what you guys have got in Iowa is just a couple days ahead of what we're getting here in Michigan. And when I look in the 2-week forecast or the 10-day forecast coming up, it's not real promising for late season. It's a lot of warm, mild weather. We don't have that awesome blizzard coming through. We don't have the big, cold, frigid front hitting.
Right.
It's kind of been the story of most of this December.
Yeah.
How does anything change for you when you have this warm weather? Like, if someone's got like, hey, this is my time off. I was going to be able to hunt around the holidays, and now we're stuck with this kind of lousy weather.
Yeah.
Do you still try? Do you hunt a different food source? Like, I know some guys might prefer some type of food in warm weather versus some type of food in cold. Or is there something totally different off the wall that you'd be thinking about with that set of conditions?
I I don't. I mean, these deer are still post rut. They're still trying to put on weight for the winter, and it's just not quite as good. They may not get to the food plot as early, and maybe that one buck you're really hoping showed up never does because he's just not. It's just not cold enough yet. But in general, you still see deer going to feed, and so obviously with the time I have, it's a huge family bonding time. I mean, we're going sit in the blind, we're spending time out there, and if we kill, great. If we don't, whatever. But um, I do think the warmer temps you can see even on like trail cam and stuff that the deer might hit the green more. They might be in the turnips more that day. And so I was actually looking at the forecast thinking about I have my blinds on trailers. And so I pulled a blind out to the beans and I thought, I'm watching the cameras and I'm watching my turnip plot have a bunch of deer in it every night. And it's actually easier to hunt with a crossbow because it's smaller. And I was like, man, I should probably pull a blind back with these warmer temps and still trying to decide if I'm going to do that. But I, I mean, I'll still go hunt my corn and my beans all the same, and all that action might be the last 30 minutes, but you
Yeah.
still get most of those deer coming out there. At least in my situation where it's private ground, the deer aren't super pressured. I mean, they're wanting to eat. I mean, this is not everywhere. That cold weather, they're out there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and that what I love about
Those are
that is,
special
yeah,
days.
yeah, they're out there so early, and that's when you get those deer you maybe never saw before. That they're like, we got to
Right.
find food, and they're traveling miles to find food. And you're like, what buck is that? And so we still have a lot of fun, a lot of success, even if the weather's not perfect.
All right. So you're saying there's a chance.
Go, just go.
Yep.
Can't kill them from
All
the
right.
couch, as they say, right?
That is the truth. So, okay. So, if folks want to see these hunts we talked about, DK or Fitz, all the others, if they want to hear about stuff, if they want to stay up to date with what you've got going on, can you give us the lowdown on where we can find all that?
Yeah, the easiest place is our YouTube channels. We have Midwest Whitetail, our main page that we put the weekly Monday main show on, and that's sort of the main kill every week. And you can find all those kills from all the guys on the main page. And then there's a group of us that do daily blogs, and so that's really our journal, right? That's the highs, the lows, that's the strategy, that's the goose egg hunt where you didn't see anything. That's going in there having great hunts that some of that stuff gets replicated on the main show if we have good encounters, but that's where it pops up within 24 hours. Typically, there's the daily channel, and so there's a small group of people that enjoy watching the grind, I guess, and it is fun because you don't miss anything following along with that. And we
Yeah.
also have our regional channel where all of our regional pro staff from across the country we post their content. And while YouTube is the easiest, we've got it on um, pretty much all the major platforms. So you can, if you just search for Midwest Whitetail, you can find those.
You guys are pumping out a whole lot of stuff, and
Yeah,
I'm always impressed with it. It's always good. It's frequent, consistent, and man, you guys are having a heck of a year this year. I don't know if you were gonna point, and I mean probably 99% of folks listening to our podcast also already watch your stuff too. But let's just hypothetically say there's someone who's new, who's not familiar with Midwest Whitetail somehow, and you were gonna point them to one video that you guys put up this year. I mean, there's a couple you guys have been pretty stoked about, I know.
yeah.
Right? You guys have had some really good stories this year. If you had to pick just one that you're gonna say, hey, you gotta go watch this one, what would that one be?
Oh man, that's tough. Oh, I gotta pick two.
Okay.
There's
Yeah, you can
two
cheat.
that are so good for different reasons. I mean, Owen's early season kill of Loch Ness and getting in to Owen's history. And I mean, being a Michigan boy and growing up and the grind and just like sort of the pinnacle of his hunting career. And not to mention, who doesn't love seeing a 215-inch deer go down? And you talk about the strategy. That guy's a master, right? I mean, he's a master of it. And so to be able to pin that deer down, 6.5 years old, all the history, and just get him just like that it's awesome. It's a great episode. And then our most recent one, Caleb Greiner, the story of his entire season. I mean, it'll bring a tear to your eye. The emotional stress. I mean, for those of us that are like really obsessed with this and just live and breathe it, and Caleb's one of those guys, to go through what he went through this year, having just a dream hit list and having EHD ravage like everything, and then to come full circle and to do a spot and stalk on the ground on a giant, I mean, it's just crazy. So they're both way up there, I think, in the history of Midwest whitetail as just top in, and they're both this year. And there's some other good ones this year, but those two, man, I'll be saying that in 10 years, like these two episodes, that's, I mean,
well, I can say the 0-1 for sure. I've seen that one. Haven't seen Caleb yet, but it's on the to watch list here pretty soon. But that's a long one. I mean,
it's a long one.
It's a long one, so I've got to invest some time in that. But it seems like the story's worth it.
3 evenings to get through it.
Yeah.
But with all the kids and the Christmas concerts and everything else.
Uh-huh.
But I tell you what, it's awesome. I mean, we're always kind of bouncing around about what's best. How do we produce these things? And we've always really prided ourselves on a good story and education and all these types of things. And we used to try really hard to cut everything down to 20 or 30 minutes. And it's hard to tell the whole story when you got some of these stories. And we say, you know what? We're not trying to fit it in to a TV channel like we used to be. Like, this is YouTube. Like, hey, you know what? People can fast forward through if they don't want to watch it all. Yeah. And, but for the ones that really enjoy that story, I mean, they're just great stories. And like, you just find yourself, I find myself just at the edge of my seat following along.
So true. Yeah. I'm so glad that we have that freedom now of longer length, the 22-minute TV shows of the back in the day, that is not enough to hardly do anything. So
it's not.
I'm all about these 45-minute, hour-long, almost like we're getting films now.
Yeah.
And these deer deserve that.
Yeah.
That's
you're
the
right.
Truth. So, well, Mike, I'm glad we finally got to chat. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I hope we can. I'm sure that next year I'm going to have to get you on the show to talk about killing moss at 5.5 with double drops and 13-inch brow tines and all that kind of stuff. So let's just put that on the calendar now. Okay?
I can only hope.
All right, let's plan on it.
Appreciate it, bud.
All right, and that's going to wrap it up for us today. Appreciate you listening. I hope you've had a wonderful 2023. I hope your hunting season has been fun, successful. I hope you've learned some things, and I hope, as we all try to do every year, I hope you've grown. And next year, hey, it should be even better. So enjoy the holidays. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, whatever you're doing, however you're celebrating. I hope it's great. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.